I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 352 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have two spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from April the 2nd, 2024. And story number 1 comes from Ryan. I can now say that I've lived in Missouri more than any other place in my life so far. One of the aspects I love is the not quite southern Gothic charm. And with Gothic charm comes spooky stuff. When I was going to a little college in Moberly, I had things happen to me. First, while there, I volunteered at a youth outreach in downtown. I'd often stay late after helping to clean up, then bike back to college around midnight each Thursday. One night, as I biked past homes and fields singing like I usually did, I came up to a turn in the road. As I slowed to make a right out of the darkness near an old fence, I heard someone say, clear as day, "Hi, Ryan." It seemed so normal, nonchalant and commonplace that it wasn't until after I had responded back with a "hi" that I blinked. It was midnight. I was completely alone there next to a yellowing soybean field in the fall. I shivered, then continued speeding back to my dorm as fast as I could pedal. Another night, as I was rolling into my college's parking lot, I happened to look up to see a dark, cloaked and hooded figure with their arms outstretched, hovering 100 feet above the school. Unlike most times when you only see something out of the corner of your eye and then focus to find nothing there, this time there was. I remained transfixed for a few minutes, staring. At some point I must have blinked, or felt the hoodwinking force slide off me because I could move again. When I looked back up, the figure had vanished. I think my roommates wanted to believe me, but it was probably a little beyond their toleration levels of spook. Lastly, at that college, I was fast asleep one night. I woke up to something that was neither waking nor a dream. I can't describe it any other way except to say that I just knew it was different. A motherly black woman stood in what looked like my grandma's old condominium waiting for me. The only light came from a standing light near her. Most of what we talked about has faded from my memory now, but I do remember her telling me that my angel would have been there himself, but there was a birthday party going on in heaven and he had to find a gift. One of the final things she told me was to beware the serpent. Upon waking, my roommates told me later that I sat up with vacant eyes and in a voice that was not my own repeated everything that had happened to me in the vision as if it were life and death. It was only until after repeating myself that I began actually waking up confused. I'm pretty sure that's why they didn't want to be my roommate the next year. Much later on, when I was living in Hannibal, I had a few things happen there too. When I first moved to Missouri, I worked at a gas station next to the Mississippi River near Quincy. If you ever want to experience the breadth and depth of humanity, that's where you need to go, especially at the end of the money on a full moon. Anyways, one night it was slower than usual. A young woman came in singing some song about monsters in her head. So my friend, who also worked there, then commented, "And under your bed?" just to be silly, because the woman was being kind of obnoxious. During that time, I was also serving as a pastor at my local country church nearby. So as I was getting myself some water, I dipped my fingers into my cup, turned to the girl and said, "Hey, I'm a pastor, and I can solve that problem for you." She looked at me and screamed, like terrified. Then she ran out of the gas station. My friend and I exchanged bewildered looks. Then he joked, telling me that he bet that if I marked the doorways, we'd have a quiet night. So grinning, I marked off the entrances and blessed them. The rest of the night we watched as near half of the customers approached the doors, seemingly bounced off some invisible barrier and then left. So we actually did end up having a peaceful evening. And as a parting note, I know of no reason forbidding anyone from making their own holy water, even if it's from gas station water in a styrofoam cup. Much later, we moved into this lovely old Victorian in Hannibal. Carved wood, double fireplaces, bay windows, you name it. It felt lovely inside. Very homey. Plus it came with its own mischievous brownie or house spirit. When we were first moving in, the house was empty. I was upstairs installing door stops in one of the bedrooms. I set down the doorstop hardware for a moment, then turned and discovered they had vanished. A year later, I found them sitting upright on my dresser in a different room. We could hear footsteps, occasional flickering lights, and even our voices being mimicked, including my sister who has never yet visited. But the hijinks were always light-hearted and comical, so we ended up naming our house spirit Laura. She's lovely. Finally, there's Theodore. I live in Hannibal, Missouri. It's an old place. Old buildings, old routes and riverboats which recall a bygone era of steamers now long past. All next to the banks of the Mississippi River. Mark Twain based Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn's stories from here. Abraham Lincoln stayed there while passing through. Even our iconic imagery of what a classic haunted house is supposed to look like originated from the Rock Cliff Mansion here, a block up the hill from where I live. Since I'm an author, I love local history, especially living history, the kind where you can walk downtown and still hear the accents of those who lived and died here 2 centuries earlier still being spoken by their descendants. A few years ago, my older sister dropped in for a visit. It was great to see her again. We've always shared this connection ever since my deadly bout with leukemia when I was 2. It's the sort where every so often we might call or text each other late in the night because one or both of us just know that something has happened. We both regularly have dreams about dead loved ones or see telling expressions of what was, is, or is about to happen. It's exceptionally easy for both of us to read the room and feel the energy of the place. Even more so with people. Every now and again I can see someone and understand where they'd been, what they're going through, and what is probably on the horizon for them. So the first day she visited, we go out and do all the touristy stuff. Hit up the local coffee shop, Java Jive, downtown. Next we take a stroll and idly check out the various antique shops and historic buildings while we catch up. Later we visit the Mark Twain Caves, you know, the one in Tom Sawyer. We walk up the stairs to the lighthouse at the north end of 2nd Street, catch some lunch at some local place where you'd wonder if change even visits here, or comes at all. Dusk came, hazy, humid and red. One of us suggested we catch the Haunted Hannibal trolley tour, so we purchased our tickets and picked our seats. Now, while the town's natural aesthetics certainly set the stage for classic Americana spooky thoughts, the tour we were on was fairly tame. We heard passing descriptions of how this or that house was supposedly haunted as the streetlights blinked to life. There was a vortex in one. Some kids got lost in the caves and were never found again. A scientist in the 1800s attempted to preserve the body of his dead daughter in the caves. I occasionally added local knowledge I've picked up from my time here, pointing out the house of a particularly gruesome murder a few years back, or the big abandoned St. Mary's Hospital, which now looked like something straight out of a zombie movie. We laughed at all the cheesy supernatural stories and claims as the trolley slowly trundled up a steep hill. With a jerk, our tour paused. Beyond us was the old Baptist cemetery, the very same one used in Tom Sawyer, where he attempts to get a cure for warts and instead witnesses a murder. It was now the darker side of dusk. Thankfully, there was still just enough light to see, despite the long tree shadows surrounding us. Our guide explained our stop and then handed out dowsing rods, then encouraged us to go and explore the graveyard. While both my sister and I were fairly comfortable with the supernatural, she was hesitant to take the rods. So I did. Our feet soon crunched and tramped through the rows of weathered gravestones. Sometimes you could pick out where a particular swathe of families had all perished at about the same time from a passing disease. Children gone too soon, buried with their parents. Stalagmite monuments to the once rich and powerful well within the view of paupers' graves, mostly unmarked, away down the steep darkening hills. For most of the time, we didn't seem to get much feedback. The dowsing rods were steady in my hands as we began to take a final turn so we could slowly trudge back to the tour trolley. And then the rods crossed. It was the weirdest thing. I swear I hadn't moved them. My sister didn't believe me, so I asked whoever it might be to please uncross the rods for me. We both watched in shock as they dutifully uncrossed themselves after a few moments. I remember how we both held our breath, minds racing, hearts pounding. From watching and reading what I can of the supernatural, especially first-hand accounts, I quickly asked whoever it was if it was okay to continue asking them some questions. Crossed rods for yes, uncrossed for no. The rods crossed. My sister and I shared an incredulous look before we began our interview with a ghost from Hannibal. Male, crossed, or female, uncrossed. Crossed. Do you know where you are? Uncrossed. Slowly, question by simple question, we gathered that a young man from the early 1800s was standing there with us. He was confused because while his grave was here, his body was not. Thanks to some of the tour guide's remarks, we were able to explain to him how most of the identifiable bodies had been moved a long time ago to the new graveyard just south of town. At one point, he was able to communicate how much my sister reminded him of his mom, but not in a good way. We shared a chuckle. He told us how she was a hard woman. While they loved each other, life had been tough for both of them after his father had passed away while he was still young. At this point, I got the feeling that all of us were getting frustrated by our limited communication, as if he was lonely and hadn't had a decent talk with anyone in a long time. It grew true dark now. As the lights from the nearby neighbourhoods and highway kindled, we heard the tour guide giving last call. The spirit must have either heard or sensed that we had to leave too because he fell quiet. We exchanged thanks and wished him peace before turning to head towards the trolley. Then my sister stopped. I asked her what the matter was. For a moment she struggled to describe what she had heard, like something clear and loud except just in her head. She shook her head, saying how if she hadn't experienced this for herself, she would have just shrugged it off as someone being overly dramatic, nuts, or lying, except... "What did you hear?" I asked. She answered, "His name is Theodore." Later, after the tour had dropped us off back downtown, we grabbed dinner at Finn's restaurant next door. As we sat down, I could tell that my sister was still visibly shaking. I jibbed her with the cliché line, "You look so pale, you must have seen a ghost." She just rolled her eyes back at me. While we waited for our meal, we rehashed what we had experienced. Both of us were still in various states of disbelief, her more so than me. Near the end of our meal, she commented how she still felt like Theodore was there with us. I nodded, suddenly unsure whether to trust my gut feeling or my logic. As we paid and got up, she declared in a clear voice that he couldn't come with us. With that, we headed up the hill for home. The next morning, after coffee, the mail came. In my little pile of credit card offers, grocery store coupons and flyers was the latest copy of the Hannibal magazine. It was just one of those monthly pieces that went out highlighting local spots and events along with a few interviews on Hannibal's history and whatnot. She idly leafed through it over our second cup of coffee until she paused. "Read this," I was told as she handed me the local magazine. I picked it up and began reading. When the article began describing the life of one stone-faced local from the early 1800s, I couldn't help but look up. The woman in the sepia-toned photo, son at her side, eerily resembled my sister. The article went on to say how after her husband had passed, she opened up and ran Hannibal's first brothel downtown. Her son's name was Theodore. So as Ryan mentioned in the story, he is a writer and you can check out his writing at ryanpfreeman.com. I'll leave the link in the description of this episode. If anybody enjoys the writing and enjoys the stories and wants to check out more, then that is the place to do it. So going right back to the beginning of this story, like if I was cycling home in the middle of the night and some voice from the fucking wheat field is like, "Hi Emma, oh no, I'm setting fire to the wheat field." I know it was a soybean field, okay, I am aware. But regardless of the grain, it is still terrifying. Because that means one of two things, right? It's something paranormal, terrifying, or it's a human being who has waited for you to cycle home, knowing you're going to cycle home that pathway, that time, and stood in the middle of the soybean field just to say hello to you. Equally terrifying. And I genuinely don't even know what to say about the hooded figure hovering above the school. Like, that is like some Constantine bullshit right there. And what makes it even weirder is the fact that it's like Ryan said, it wasn't like a corner of the eye kind of situation where you see something, but when you go to focus on it, it's gone, or it's when you blink, it's not there. This was something that he stared at for, a period of time and then went, "Oh, okay, this isn't good. This isn't normal." I also hate to say it, with that combined with the dream, I would be the same as your roommates. I'd be like, "Listen, I don't mind where we live, but I'm not sharing a room with Ryan, okay? I'm not dealing with those dreams again." And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't care what science says. I know there has been scientific research done into the prevalence of the full moon in cases of, mental health issues, etc., 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 whether or not crimes go up. And I think the idea is that crimes go up when there's a full moon because there's better visibility, something along those lines. And anyway, the science says that mad things don't happen more on the full moon, basically. But I'm here to argue that that's not true. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it based on what other people have said, based on my own experiences working in a mental health facility and in teaching, based on speaking to other people who have worked in the medical field in particular. Weird things happen during the full moon. People go weird during the full moon, and I don't care what anyone says. I definitely think, though, your story about working at a gas station, and I can imagine that gas stations bring out the best and the worst of humanity. I mean, that story in itself sounds like the basis for a brilliant short story or TV series. So, Ryan, I'm giving you that one for free, okay? And the last story about Theodore, it really is fascinating. I've never used dowsing rods. I know very little about them. I know they were originally used in water divination and are obviously now used in paranormal situations. I mean, I can only imagine that it would be very frustrating to try and have a conversation with somebody using the divining rods, right? Because you can only give two answers and they have to be two definite answers. There isn't any room for ambiguity, really. I mean, it's amazing that your sister got this information where it was just like, I know this person's name was Theodore. And then to get that magazine the next day with the same story, this woman who looks really like your sister, and then the dad had died, she opened a brothel, and her son's name was Theodore. Like, is that a weird coincidence? Because it feels like too much of a coincidence, or is that the universe being like, yes, this really was the person that you met? Or rather, yes, this really was the spirit that you met. I mean, whatever the answer is, it's deeply settling either way.
Do you remember what it's like being in your 20s? I sometimes look back at that period of my life and laugh just as much as I cringe. If you do the same, then you've got to watch Queenie, the new original series on Hulu. Who is Queenie? Queenie is a 20-something-year-old living in London. She's facing all the firsts. First major heartbreak, first shitty apartment and soul-sucking job, first therapy session to work through those mommy issues. Can she turn her quarter-life crisis into a revolution? Maybe. Will she make some questionable decisions along the way? Definitely. The new series Queenie is now streaming on Hulu.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
And story number 2 comes from Ellen. I've never been a believer of the supernatural, with little experience to support such a theory. In my early 20s, I moved in with my recent boyfriend of that time in a house he had bought just before we met. He wasn't able to move very far, and there weren't a lot of properties available close enough to his family farm, which he ran and had to remain close to. So when this house came on the market, he took the opportunity, despite the tragic detail that the former owner had taken their own life on that property. The late owner had been a lonely character who moved to this village from far away, but had formed a friendship with at least one of the neighbours that I know of. My partner had his dad, his wife, and his grandmother down the road. The latter was very close to him and eager to see him live up to his potential in every field. Sadly, she passed away before I got to meet her. As it often is, moving was quite chaotic, but we were both young without a household of possessions to bring with us, so we got all the boxes and furniture over in a single day. I brought my dog Lion with me, and the first night we spent on our own since the farm work had been postponed due to the moving in process. After about 10 minutes alone in the house, the electricity went out in the whole house. I managed to find a candle and some matches in the complete darkness of the late night and lit it. The situation made me uncomfortable, and there wasn't a lot to engage in without power. It's not like the TV was set up or anything, so I crawled into bed with my dog and we waited a couple of hours until my boyfriend arrived. He managed to get the power back and we went to sleep. I worked part-time and irregular hours, and he had a full-time job apart from the farm, which meant that we rarely spent more than a couple of hours together each day. I was often alone with Lion during the days. My dog had always been a mommy's boy and wanted to stay close to me, lie at my feet or rest his head on my lap. He went with me everywhere except to work. During our first summer months in the house, these traits increased. From the hallway, we had a small corridor which led to a door from which you entered the attached garage. The upstairs floor had no rooms. It was all one big space, and we only had our king-size bed up there. No other furniture but a couple of lamps. I started to experience noises, bangs and creaks I would not expect in a moderately new house, but these could only be heard when I was alone. My dog would freeze in the hallway, growling at the door to the garage, or lift his head and give muffled barks towards the ceiling. Once I was watching television downstairs and could swear that I heard footsteps very clearly on the upper floor. It was broad daylight, and I brushed it off and turned the volume up. I'm being silly. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Mindset initiated. Then Lion burst up and took off running up the stairs, growling and heckles raised. I called him back down and went out for a long walk to get out of the house. I started to make a point of not looking up at the upstairs window when coming back from walks or work. I had a freakish idea that I would see someone, and that would ruin my strong denial of something sinister in the working. After a while living in the village, I started to get to know some of the neighbours and went over to have a cup of tea and just chat. One in particular I visited regularly. She was older than me and had fond memories of the late owner of our house. She told me that he had been wrongly accused of some crime and therefore moved here to get some peace and quiet. She also said that he would have really liked me. I was just his type, and laughed at the match. At our house, things started to escalate, and I told my boyfriend of my unease. It troubled him that I wasn't loving the place, and he tried soothing me. This made me think that it was very unlikely that he would play tricks on me that would further avert me from the house. One morning, the kitchen was in complete disarray. It looked exactly like an old horror movie. Every drawer was fully out and all the cupboards stood wide open. Astonished, I just closed everything and proceeded with my day. But things often went missing, like pots and pans. And my boyfriend could hardly fry an egg and never used any of the utensils. Fall turned to winter, and snow lay heavy on the ground as we prepared for the holidays. Having an urge to set the right mood for a rare movie night together, I went up to our still empty second floor to turn the lights on in the 2 windows. Our backyard faced the deep forest with nothing to see besides the white lawn. When I turned on the lamp, I could see the sprayed window with its silhouette of the lamp and the shape of me reflected on the snow. It was a crisp image, and I felt a little childish, but I could not stop myself from reaching out to wave, just for the sake of watching the shadow in the snow move. My blood actually chills just writing this down. But when I did this, I saw my arm clear as day protrude into the image on the snow. Confused, I took a slow step to my left. Then my silhouette appeared on the ground, at least a head shorter than the other figure standing beside me, also shaped as a person. I screamed and tumbled down the stairs. That I didn't break anything is nothing but a miracle. My boyfriend went up and searched the upstairs, looking beneath the bed and in storage, which held a couple of boxes, but of course found nothing. That event made me refuse sleeping upstairs, and I moved into the office downstairs. Unfortunately, I didn't escape whatever was haunting me. I started to wake up fully or half dressed, and I am not prone to sleepwalking. I did not remember getting up or putting jeans on in the middle of the night and was getting reluctant to stay in the house. I wanted to move. I didn't feel safe. Lion acted like my guardian and reacted to things that I couldn't see or hear, often growling and raising his heckles. A couple of times when I woke up he was missing, and I found him locked in the garage, on the other side of the office wall. When I let him out, he acted as if he'd been in there for quite some time, excited to be back in the house. He couldn't possibly jump the door handle, pass through, shut the door behind him and turn the lock. While brushing my teeth one morning, I had the bathroom door open, overlooking the entrance. Lion rested just outside the threshold and my boyfriend was over at the farm. Then suddenly, the front door flew up with a bang that made me startle and had Lion darting out, barking frantically. It was not a windy day, and the door had never even slid up before. By this time, my boyfriend moved down to share the office space with us, but wasn't convinced of my retellings. I couldn't blame him. But he was worried because my fear was obvious and we discussed moving, but to him it wasn't a first choice. It didn't take many nights for him to be on board with me. I can't explain it, but one morning we were brushing our teeth together in the bathroom when I saw something on his neck. We were both puzzled by the large drawing on the back of his neck. It was a lot of lines, like if you grab a pen with your whole hand and try to cover something quickly with frantic movements of your arm. He was covered in red, harsh lines of ink. The fact that it hadn't woke him up was unbelievable. You're not a heavy sleeper after a couple of seasons of calvings, and these were not drawn with a light hand. It takes some force to draw on skin, and we could not find a red ink pen or remember having one. We contacted a medium to come to the house, cleanse it or whatever needed to be done. I wanted to move out, but agreed to this effort since we had all the animals to consider. We couldn't move without having to step down on the agriculture. The medium came and immediately told us about 2 presences. One was a man and the other a woman which belonged to my boyfriend. She held love for him and disliked me, didn't think I was worthy somehow. She pestered me because she wanted me gone, basically. And my boyfriend blushed and said that maybe his grandmother wouldn't be impressed by my more modern takings on household work or level of cooking. He quickly concluded that it was her and that she perhaps wouldn't have liked me very much since she always pampered him, and I often brought up to discussion that I wanted our relationship to be less stereotypical. Then the medium looked to me and said the other soul was catching to me. We weren't related, but he only made his presence known when we were alone and could only be described as affectionate in his attention. She said that he enjoyed watching me always, and that he had died by his own hand, not because of age or sickness. She proceeded with trying to guide them on. I don't know what to call it, but you understand my meaning. It took some time, and especially the female was hard to convince, since she felt she was needed in our household. But she said she succeeded and burned some sage to let smoke in some areas of the house. And actually the haunting stopped, and I soon felt confident enough to move back upstairs with my calmer, not as guarding, dog. We eventually split up, and this was some years ago now. I still consider myself to be a great skeptic and can't believe this is my experience. It's not exaggerated, made up or imaginary. I bordered on the last one and questioned my sanity. But then the marks on the neck happened and I wasn't alone with it anymore. Explanation or no, today I live by myself in a very old house at the edge of the forest, the last one on the road. I'm never afraid or uneasy at all. I do not flaunt the stories of that house because I don't want to be taken for a fool and don't feel the need to be believed. It ended, and that's all that matters to me, whatever it was. Ellen, I think that's such a healthy way to look at things, to be like, look, I don't need to be believed. Whatever happened, it happened, but it's over. That's the main thing. It ended. Also, I'm just going to say it, right? I'm just going to say it. How rude of his grandmother. How incredibly rude. You know, obviously, like you said, she loved him very much. She wanted the best for him, etc., etc. But like, to be haunting you because she thinks you're not good enough? Rude. I'd honestly get that Ouija board out. Come and say it to my face. Come and say it to my face. And look, I get it. Family members are protective and they want to protect the people that they love, etc., etc., etc. But don't be doing that by haunting the shit out of the new girlfriend. That's not fair. No way. There's also a weird creepiness about the spirit of the man who took his own life in the house. Not that he took his own life. That's not the weird creepy bit. It's the neighbour being like, oh, he would have loved you. You would have been just his type. And then kind of watching you with what the medium said was great affection and only being around you when you were alone. Oh, it's giving me the ick. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. And that description of standing and your shadow from inside the house being sort of reflected out onto the snow. Like, I don't think it's childish to give a little wave. I would have done the same thing and still would do the same thing. But having a shadow then appear behind you, a bigger shadow, you best believe tumbling down the stairs, I think, is pretty much what 99% of people listening would have done in that situation. That sounds absolutely terrifying. Also, the writing on your partner's neck at the time, the red writing on his neck, reminded me of a story that I read on boards.ie 8 years ago, and it was basically this woman was living in an apartment and she woke up and all of her jeans had been written all over, like scribbled on, just scribbled all over her jeans, and she was really freaked out about it and couldn't understand what was happening. And it turned out that she was really stressed and she was actually sleepwalking at night time, putting on her jeans and sitting and scrawling all over her own jeans in pen. Not saying that was what happened to your boyfriend, but it did remind me of that. And for some reason that story really freaked me out. I think because of how active our brains can be when we're stressed. And in a way, like, I understand that obviously it must have been really stressful for both your boyfriend and you to have all this, to wake up with all this red ink all over his neck. And even if you were sleepwalking, how would he not wake up when you were doing that? That's wild. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it was sleepwalking is what I'm trying to say. But I am glad that it happened in the respect that at least he then believed you and was like, okay, something weird is going on, because then at least you feel validated and listened to. And I'm glad that the medium was able to do something about it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Ryan and Ellen for sending in your stories. Remember, you can find more of Ryan's writing at ryanpfreeman.com, and the link to that will be in the description of this episode. Remember, the last story from today came from April the 2nd, 2024. If you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Is that your new Lexus RX?
RX plug-in hybrid.
So it runs all electric?
Yeah, for short trips. And can switch to gas for long.
Wow. What does your range anxiety therapist say?
Dr. Feeney?
Uh-huh.
He says my RX cured me.
No more range anxiety therapy?
Nope.
Well, you're an inspiration to us all.
The best-selling Lexus RX lineup, now with a plug-in hybrid. Click the banner to discover more. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.